My grandfather used to tell me that the easiest way to become wealthy was to buy something everyone else thought was trash and sit on it until they realized it was gold. I always took that advice to heart, but I never imagined it would lead me to a standoff with the biggest financial institution in the state, a standoff where they literally laughed in my face. It all started with the dirt. Not just any dirt, but 400 acres of what looked like utterly useless scrubland in the forgotten corner of the county. I found it listed on a dusty, decades-old website for pennies on the dollar. It was the kind of listing that real estate agents usually use to fill space, a property nobody wanted, nobody had seen in years, and frankly, nobody even remembered existed. The official description was something like, wooded lot, irregular topography, no public access, suitable for marginal farming or hunting lease. To me, it read, opportunity. I'd been working as an architectural draftsman for 10 years, sketching other people's dreams, their McMansions, their strip malls, their sleek office parks. Every single design I drew was based on a foundation of solid, profitable, highly valued land. I was tired of drawing foundations for other people's empires. I wanted my own. I cashed out my entire life savings, every last dime, to buy that scrubland outright. The previous owner, an elderly man who inherited it from his great-aunt and had been paying taxes on it for 50 years without ever visiting, was so thrilled to get rid of the liability that he barely haggled the price. He probably thought I was insane, and if I'm honest, I felt a little insane myself, signing the closing documents in a small, dusty lawyer's office downtown. The whole place smelled like old paper and regret, but I had the deed. I owned the land. The plan was simple, or so I thought. I didn't want to farm it. I didn't want to hunt on it. I wanted to develop it, not immediately, but in phases. The first phase was securing a modest loan, enough to clear an access road, run basic utilities from the nearest junction point 5 miles away, and commission a proper topographical survey. That survey, I knew, was the key. Without the survey, the land was just anonymous acreage. With the survey, I could show the bank exactly what they were lending against. I estimated I needed $500,000 to get started, a drop in the bucket for a bank that financed billion-dollar skyscrapers. So, I put on my best suit, ironed the creases sharp enough to cut glass, compiled a meticulous business plan, complete with aerial photos, zoning maps, and a projected timeline, and walked into the imposing glass tower of First Regional Bank. I was directed to Mr. Sterling, a man whose tailored suit looked more expensive than my car, and whose smile was thin, practiced, and entirely devoid of warmth. I laid out my vision: a sustainable, low-density residential community, leveraging the natural beauty of the challenging terrain, marketed to people seeking privacy and environmental stewardship. I spoke with passion. I spoke with data. I spoke as if the success of this bank depended entirely on them backing my dream. Sterling listened, drumming his fingers slowly on the mahogany desk, his eyes darting between my face and the cover of my proposal. When I finished, the silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, like wet wool. He didn't pick up the proposal. He didn't ask a single follow-up question about the market analysis or the environmental impact study I had paid a small fortune for. Instead, he leaned back, crossed his hands over his chest, and let out a short, sharp burst of sound that wasn't quite a cough and wasn't quite a laugh. It was a scoff, arrogant and dismissive. "Mr. Hayes," he said, using my name with a tone that suggested I had wasted his precious time. "I appreciate the effort you put into this binder. It's certainly a professional-looking document. But let's be realistic." He paused, letting his gaze travel the length of the room, as if inviting the invisible ghosts of high finance to mock me alongside him. "That tract of land you bought? The one out by the Old Quarry Road? We ran the satellite images. We checked the tax history. We even cross-referenced your address with the county's list of abandoned parcels." He then delivered the line that is etched permanently into my memory, the one that made my blood run cold and hot simultaneously, the one that transformed my nervous anxiety into cold, focused determination. His voice dripping with contempt, he said, "That land is worthless." The bank laughed at my loan application. "That land is worthless. We wouldn't lend you $5,000 against that asset, let alone $500,000. It's a liability, Mr. Hayes. Go back and draw pretty pictures for rich people. That's what you're good at." He actually pushed my immaculate proposal back across the desk toward me with 2 fingers, as if touching it might contaminate his perfect life. I didn't argue. Arguing with arrogance is like wrestling with mud. You only get dirty. I simply stood up, calmly collected my materials, and placed them back in my briefcase. Sterling watched me, his expression fixed in a smug certainty that he had just crushed an insignificant fly. He assumed I would slink away, defeated. He assumed I was just another dreamer who had bet everything on a fantasy and lost. He assumed wrong. I walked out of his office, through the lobby, and right out the main doors onto the busy street. The whole interaction, from my introduction to his brutal dismissal, had taken less than 15 minutes. I didn't get into my car. I stood on the curb, the afternoon sun beating down, feeling the insult like a physical burn. I didn't reach for my phone to call a friend or complain. I reached for the one contact I had sworn I would only use if everything else failed, the nuclear option. The name wasn't saved under anything clever, just a single formal title. I took a deep breath, the anger giving way to a strange, almost eerie calm. I pressed the screen and watched the number dial. It rang twice. A formal voice answered immediately. "The office of Mr. Elias Thorne." "This is Andrew Hayes," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "Tell Mr. Thorne I need to activate the agreement, the one concerning the mineral rights in Sector 4. I spoke directly and clearly, using the precise coded language we had agreed upon years ago in a completely different context. Tell him First Regional Bank just valued the property at 0, and I require immediate assistance in correcting their valuation." I didn't wait for a response from the assistant. I hung up. I checked the time on my phone. 2:15 p.m. I leaned against a cold marble pillar of the bank, waiting. The traffic roared past, but all I heard was the ticking clock in my head. 10 minutes, I told myself. It will take him 10 minutes. I knew Elias Thorne. If the call registered, if the code words worked, he would move mountains. And exactly 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated, flashing a caller ID I didn't recognize, an unlisted number with a private line prefix. I answered it immediately. A voice, booming and slightly breathless, cut through the city noise. "This is Robert Harrington. I am the president of First Regional Bank. Mr. Hayes, what in God's name is going on?" I smiled. The game had just changed. The bank president, the man who oversaw Mr. Sterling and the entire institution, was calling me, panicking, precisely 10 minutes after I made one single quiet call. But that was only the beginning. The real twist was why Elias Thorne cared at all, and what exactly I knew about that worthless dirt that the bank did not. That secret was worth far more than the $500,000 I was asking for. "Mr. Harrington," I replied, keeping my voice level, almost annoyingly calm. "I was just laughed out of your loan officer's office, Sterling, I believe his name was. I was seeking a reasonable, secured loan of $500,000 against a property I fully own. I was informed, quite condescendingly, that my 400 acres were worthless and that your bank wouldn't even lend me $5,000. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, the sound muffled by what I could only assume was a very expensive office. Harrington's earlier bluster was replaced by a strained urgency. "Mr. Hayes, I apologize if one of my junior officers was unprofessional. But, with all due respect, I'm fielding a very unusual and, frankly, intense inquiry right now. It involves your name and the property in question. What exactly is your association with Elias Thorne?" That was the core of it. The moment I mentioned Sector 4 to Thorne's office, an alarm went off that bypassed every tier of First Regional Bank's bureaucracy and went straight to the top. I walked around the corner, away from the bank's main entrance, leaning against a vendor's empty hot dog stand. I needed a minute to construct the narrative that would shift the power dynamic completely. "My association with Mr. Thorne is purely transactional, Mr. Harrington," I said, choosing my words with the precision of a scalpel, "and highly confidential. The short version is this. I purchased the property, the very property your bank deemed worthless this afternoon, under the expressed written condition that I would grant Mr. Thorne's holding company the right of first refusal for all mineral extraction rights discovered after my purchase date. This agreement was executed 3 years ago, before I even located the land. It was a standing offer for any land that met specific geographical parameters in this region. I let that sink in. A 3-year-old prearranged agreement with one of the most ruthless and wealthy men in the global resource game, all concerning a parcel of worthless dirt. And what exactly have you discovered, Mr. Hayes? Harrington's voice was now low, tight with suspicion, and a fear of missing out that must be endemic to bank presidents. The panic was real. He knew Elias Thorne didn't get involved for small potatoes. That's the $500,000 question, isn't it? I countered smoothly. I haven't discovered anything definitive yet. That's what the loan was for, the proper topographical and geological survey. However, the geographic data and the history of the old quarry that borders my land strongly suggest a high probability of a significant high-demand deposit beneath Sector 4. Thorne's people, who are not fools, identified this area of the county as a high-potential zone years ago. They are waiting for me to pull the trigger on the survey. My call 10 minutes ago was to inform them that, due to the bank's refusal to fund the preliminary work, I was preparing to default on my agreement and sell the mineral rights directly to a competitor, potentially a foreign entity, to finance the survey myself. It was a lie wrapped around a kernel of truth. The agreement with Thorne was real, a long-shot deal I'd set up through a mutual professional contact. The part about selling to a foreign entity was pure bluff, a pressure point designed to make Harrington sweat cold, corporate fear. Thorne had a reputation for being possessive. If he thought I was going to cut him out, he would move instantly to secure the asset, and the easiest way to do that was to apply devastating pressure to the financial choke point. First Regional Bank, which I knew from a quick Google search, had several quiet investment partnerships with Thorne's subsidiary funds. Harrington cleared his throat again. Mr. Hayes, this changes the context entirely. We had no record of this potential mineral value or the associated agreement with Mr. Thorne on file. My sincerest apologies again for Mr. Sterling's regrettable lack of foresight. I will personally review your application. Can you meet me back at the bank in, say, 20 minutes? I can be there in 20 minutes, I agreed, a slow, triumphant smile finally breaking through. But I won't be meeting with Mr. Sterling, and I won't be discussing a loan for $500,000. I knew I had him cornered. The insult had shifted to an opportunity, and opportunities for men like Harrington were sacred. The price of the hassle, the emotional distress, and the lost time means the loan needs to be revised. I now require a $1.5 million line of credit, immediately convertible to a secured development loan upon a favorable survey result. And I want Mr. Sterling's office. I don't want to meet with him. I want his physical office space to be the location of our meeting. It's a matter of principle. Harrington hesitated. A slight, almost imperceptible delay. To ask for a $1.5 million loan when I'd been rejected for $500,000 was audacious. To demand the use of a loan officer's personal office was outright arrogance. But the name Elias Thorne was heavier than any of those demands. Consider it done, Mr. Hayes. Sterling has just been reassigned to special projects for the afternoon. I'll have legal ready with a term sheet in 20 minutes. The elevator to my executive suite is now programmed to take you directly to the 28th floor. Please come. I hung up, adjusted my tie, and walked back towards the towering glass building, feeling the concrete underneath my shoes a little differently this time. I was no longer the architectural draftsman sketching dreams. I was the architect of my own fortune, playing a high-stakes game of poker with a land deed that was either worth nothing or everything. But the deeper I went, the more I realized the secret to the land's true value wasn't just the mineral rights I'd bluffed with. There was a second, far more dangerous secret, one that Elias Thorne himself was unaware of. And it involved the Old Quarry Road that bordered my property. I needed that $1.5 million, and I needed it now, before Thorne's aggressive research arm dug deep enough to find the real geological anomaly. The elevator ride up to the 28th floor was silent and swift, a polished metal coffin ascending to the executive heights of financial power. When the doors opened, I wasn't greeted by a secretary, but by Robert Harrington himself, flanked by two sharp-looking men in identical dark suits. Legal counsel, no doubt. Harrington's handshake was firm, almost desperate, a stark contrast to the dismissive wave I'd received just 20 minutes earlier. He led me straight into Sterling's office. The irony was sweet. The window view that Sterling had proudly shown off as a symbol of his success was now mine, if only for an hour. His personal items, a framed photo of his family, a plaque commemorating a sales milestone, were gone, cleared out with almost military efficiency. The office looked sterile, ready for a new occupant, or, in my case, a brief, hostile takeover. We sat down, and the legal team immediately presented me with a preliminary term sheet. They had moved fast. Too fast. The documents were already structured around a $1.5 million revolving line of credit, contingent on a geological survey being commissioned within 30 days and the prior notification of Elias Thorne's office. The speed confirmed my suspicion. Thorne was pushing Harrington hard, perhaps even threatening to pull existing investment vehicles if this mineral rights issue wasn't resolved immediately in my favor, thereby securing his own future interest. "The terms seem agreeable, Mr. Hayes," Harrington said, leaning forward. "We have adjusted the valuation of your property significantly based on the potential yield and your prior agreement with Mr. Thorne's firm. We're offering a favorable interest rate considering the volatile nature of resource investment." He was practically purring now, trying to win me over. "There's one missing piece," I interrupted, pushing the papers gently back. "And it's not a legal point. It's an operational one." I reached into my briefcase, not for my geological maps, but for a heavily laminated county history document I had retrieved from the local archives. It detailed the history of the land adjacent to mine, the Old Quarry. The geological survey will require heavy drilling equipment. To access the key points on my property, the area we call Sector 4, I need a temporary easement across the Old Quarry Road, which happens to be owned by your bank, doesn't it? Harrington exchanged a quick, nervous glance with one of his lawyers. "The Old Quarry Road?" "Yes. The bank acquired that short access strip years ago as a buffer for a commercial development that never materialized. It's inconsequential. We can certainly grant you an easement. It's just a couple of miles of gravel road." I smiled, a genuine, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "It's not inconsequential, Mr. Harrington. It's the second and far more critical piece of collateral. You see, the reason the original owner sold the land for a song and why the county records list it as having irregular topography isn't just because of natural hills and ravines. It's because that property, specifically the boundary with the Old Quarry Road, is the site of a long-abandoned, unauthorized mining operation from the late 19th century. A small, forgotten copper and iron ore mine." Harrington scoffed slightly, regaining a sliver of his earlier confidence. "Mr. Hayes, old mines are hazards, not assets. They lower property values exponentially. They carry environmental cleanup liabilities that could bankrupt a small country. If you think an abandoned mine is the secret, you've made a terrible mistake, and Elias Thorne won't be happy." "I agree completely," I said, leaning in and lowering my voice. "An abandoned mine is a massive liability. Unless it's a massive liability that holds a far greater secret than copper or iron. The copper and iron were distractions. The real secret lies in the unique composition of the tailings, the waste rock, left over from that operation." I opened the history document and pointed to a poorly drawn map. This county history notes that the original mine owners were shut down not because the ore ran out, but because the local government deemed the site geologically unstable and cited unusual atmospheric conditions near the lower shafts. They were paranoid about deep drilling equipment being used because of the gases released during extraction. I paused for dramatic effect, letting the lawyers and the president absorb the word gases. In the 1890s, they had no idea what they had found. They thought it was some kind of poisonous vapor. But modern geological and atmospheric data, particularly the kind studied by Thorne's competitors, suggests something else entirely. The tailings from that Quarry Road border contain high traces of what is now called monazite sand. Harrington blinked, the name clearly meaning nothing to him. "Monazite? It's a reddish-brown phosphate mineral," I explained, maintaining the professorial tone. It is the primary commercial source for rare earth elements, specifically thorium and neodymium. Thorium is an infinitely superior, cleaner fuel source for next-generation nuclear reactors, which Mr. Thorne happens to be heavily invested in, not just resources. Neodymium is essential for every piece of high-powered magnetics, from wind turbines to missile guidance systems. The old miners dumped the tailings, which are rich in these elements, right alongside the quarry road, because back then it was just useless sand. They didn't even realize they were discarding the most valuable part of the mine. The silence this time was profound, weighted with the sudden realization that they had laughed away a treasure trove. The bank had been sitting on the Old Quarry Road easement, literally bordering millions, possibly billions, in untapped rare earth materials, believing it was just a throwaway piece of buffer land. The value wasn't just in my 400 acres, it was in the entire surrounding geographic anomaly, which Thorne wanted. So, the $1.5 million line of credit is accepted, I concluded, picking up the pen. But the contract must include not just the temporary easement for the survey, but a permanent, non-revocable right of access across the entire Old Quarry Road strip for future development and extraction purposes. You retain ownership of the road, but I get permanent use, free of charge. This was the true power play. I was leveraging their fear of Elias Thorne and their profound ignorance about the land's chemical composition to secure permanent infrastructure access, which was the only way to effectively move the massive amounts of rare earth sand. They were trapped. They couldn't consult Thorne, as that would expose my true intent. They couldn't say no, because that would risk me going to a competitor who would certainly find the monazite. Harrington looked at his lawyers, who, after a tense, whispered exchange, nodded reluctantly. He picked up his pen and scrawled a note in the margin of the term sheet. Permanent, non-revocable right of access to Old Quarry Road granted. I initialed the change, signed the document, and the deal was done. But as I walked out, I knew I had opened a door not just to wealth, but to danger. Elias Thorne was only interested in thorium. What happens when he finds the real anomaly I haven't mentioned yet? The one that even I wasn't expecting. The contracts were signed, the money was wired, and the $1.5 million was sitting in a new account before the sun went down. I had won the battle, securing the funding and the critical access road, the foundation of my future empire. But securing the monazite sand was only phase 1. Phase 2 was the immediate deployment of the survey team, and phase 3 was the revelation of the secret I had been protecting from everyone, including Thorne. The first thing I did was hire the best geotechnical team money could buy, a small independent firm specializing in remote site assessment, led by an uncompromising old-school geologist named Dr. Helena Voss. I met her at a diner 50 miles outside the city, far from the prying eyes of First Regional Bank or Thorne's scouts. I didn't just hand her the bank-approved documents, I handed her my personal findings, 3 years of obsessive research into local legends, historical newspaper clippings, and obscure geological papers from the 1950s that spoke of the unique mineral composition of the entire valley. The bank thinks you're looking for thorium-rich monazite, Dr. Voss, I told her, spreading my own hand-drawn maps across the worn laminate table. And you should certainly confirm those deposits in Sector 4. That's the collateral for the loan. But I need you to focus your deep scan radar in this area, right here. I pointed to a specific, anomalous spot deep within my property, far from the Old Quarry Road, marked with a single, small, red X. This area shows a nearly complete absence of a magnetic field on my low-grade scans. It's a geological dead zone. That shouldn't happen, not in an area rich with iron ore tailings. Dr. Voss, a woman who looked like she chewed gravel for breakfast, didn't scoff like Sterling. She narrowed her eyes, intrigued. An anomagnetic zone? That can indicate a few things, Mr. Hayes. Deep-seated igneous rock, or perhaps an extreme concentration of a diamagnetic element, something that repels magnetic fields. Like bismuth, or even graphite. She tapped the map with a scarred finger. Or something far, far stranger. Stranger is what I'm hoping for, I admitted. The legends around the old quarry aren't just about poisonous gases. They talk about a peculiar green glow and rocks that felt too light near the end of the mine's operation, right before it was shut down by a panicked local government. The old miners thought it was a curse. I think it was something else entirely. Dr. Voss understood immediately. A green glow combined with a diamagnetic signature and high levels of naturally occurring thorium points to one terrifyingly valuable possibility: uranium. Specifically, the less common, highly enriched form that sometimes occurs naturally in conjunction with rare earth deposits: Uraninite. If the concentration was high enough, I wasn't sitting on a resource opportunity. I was sitting on a strategic national asset. And if the bank or Elias Thorne knew I was about to confirm a vast, easily accessible uranium deposit, the whole deal would collapse, and the US government might step in, seizing the land immediately under eminent domain. Or Thorne might deploy far more sinister methods than just calling a bank president. The survey began 3 days later. We used the $1.5 million to bring in specialized ground-penetrating radar and silent drilling rigs that could take core samples without the telltale noise and footprint of conventional mining equipment. We deliberately started the noisy, obvious work near the Old Quarry Road, confirming the monazite deposit for the bank and Thorne's remote monitoring teams. I sent them meticulously cropped photos and glowing yet cautious reports that spoke of promising monazite yields, exactly what they wanted to hear. Meanwhile, Dr. Voss and I slipped away every night to the silent anomagnetic zone marked X. The initial GPR readings were baffling. Instead of solid rock beneath the topsoil, the scans showed a vast, deep, almost perfectly spherical cavity. It wasn't a natural cave. The geometry was too precise. And within that cavity, the readings spiked, not for thorium, but for an incredibly dense, non-ferrous material that was reflecting the radar in a way Dr. Voss had never seen. "It's not just uranium, Hayes," she whispered to me one night as we reviewed the data by the light of a single lantern. "Whatever is down there is creating a massive gravity anomaly. It's incredibly heavy, but it's not iron or nickel. It's too clean, too uniform." This was the twist I hadn't prepared for. I had planned for thorium. I had braced for uranium, but I had not anticipated an unknown, geometrically perfect underground structure. This wasn't just geological. It felt manufactured. My simple goal of leveraging worthless dirt into wealth suddenly escalated into something far more dangerous. Who built it? And why? The next night, we drilled the first exploratory borehole directly over the center of the anomagnetic zone. The drill bit went through a surprising depth of soft earth and then hit something hard and resistant. Not rock, but what felt like impossibly dense ceramic or metal. When Dr. Voss retrieved the first tiny core sample, the three of us stared at it in stunned silence. It was a dark, crystalline substance that felt unnaturally cold and heavy in my palm. The Geiger counter, which had been registering high background radiation from the thorium, suddenly went wild, shrieking uncontrollably the moment the sample entered the air. It wasn't just uranium. It was something far more concentrated, far more dangerous. The sample was so radioactive that Dr. Voss immediately sealed it in a lead-lined container and demanded we evacuate the area. As we packed up the specialized equipment, a flash of headlights sliced through the woods bordering the Old Quarry Road. It wasn't the bank's security. It was a sleek black SUV, the kind Thorne's top people drove, pulling right onto the gravel strip I had just secured the permanent right-of-way for. They were coming for the monazite, or so I thought. But as the doors opened, a chilling realization hit me. They weren't interested in the obvious deposits. They had found the anomaly too, and they were here to seize it, and they were armed. The headlights from the black SUV cut through the darkness, illuminating the makeshift lab setup we were frantically dismantling. This was not a coincidence. This was a response. Thorne's people weren't relying on my reports. They were using their own advanced surveillance, perhaps a thermal imaging drone or even satellite monitoring that had picked up the slight heat signature of our specialized equipment in that specific, anomalous spot. They didn't know it was uranium yet, but they knew I was hiding something more valuable than monazite. "Dr. Voss, the container," I hissed, grabbing her arm. The lead-line box holding the hyper-radioactive core sample was the most important piece of evidence. If they seized it, my leverage was gone, and my life would likely be complicated in the extreme. She, an old hand at field risk, was already stuffing it into a nondescript insulated cooler bag, treating it like a precious, unstable organ. Get to the north boundary. Follow the creek bed. Don't look back. She nodded grimly and vanished into the thicket, her steps surprisingly agile for her age. I stayed behind, pulling the tarp over the sensitive GPR unit, creating a distraction. I watched as 3 men, big, silent, and dressed in tactical black, stepped out of the SUV. They weren't bank security. They were private contractors, security specialists, or worse. The man leading them wasn't Thorne's assistant. He was the chief of security, a former Special Forces operator whose face I recognized from an obscure industry profile, a man known only by his first name, Kellen. Kellen approached slowly, his hands visible, but his posture radiating controlled menace. "Mr. Hayes," he called out, his voice a low gravel echoing in the woods. "Mr. Thorne sends his regards. He understands you've been working hard on the survey. He's just become interested in the results from this specific area." He gestured towards the drill site, perfectly zeroed in on the anomagnetic zone. The bluff was over. "I'm confirming the monazite reserves, Kellen," I replied, forcing a casual air, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "That's what the loan was for. Nothing more to see here yet." Kellen stopped 10 feet away. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. "Spare us the contract details, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Thorne understands the difference between thorium and a classified gravity anomaly. We know what you hit tonight. Where is the sample?" This was the final, terrifying twist. It wasn't just uranium or concentrated rare earths. Thorne's intelligence was so deep that he knew the underlying physical characteristic of the structure Dr. Voss had identified, the gravity anomaly. This meant they weren't interested in the raw materials for energy. They were interested in the unknown technology or the material itself that was causing such a bizarre distortion in the local gravity field. This was far beyond geology. This was physics, possibly extraterrestrial in origin, or at the very least, a relic of some incredibly advanced, forgotten human endeavor. My worthless land was suddenly the site of the most significant discovery of the century, and I was standing on the front line of a high-stakes corporate retrieval mission. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, keeping my voice steady. "We found nothing but deep, dense granite, just as the county records predicted." Kellen sighed, a sound of profound boredom. He snapped his fingers, and one of his men moved quickly to the borehole, dropping a small, specialized sensor down the shaft. He waited 30 seconds, retrieved it, and whispered something into Kellen's ear. Kellen's eyes hardened. "The residual radiation levels are astronomical, Hayes, and the seismic signature is entirely inconsistent with granite. It registered as a dense, non-ferrous compound with a latticework structure. Where is the person who took the sample?" "The woman." The danger was immediate. They knew about Dr. Voss. I had to create the biggest possible diversion. I remembered the old mine tailings, still scattered along the boundary. I had left behind a small, heavily shielded Geiger counter attached to a timer near the main deposit. It wasn't the core sample, but it would do the job of confusing them for a few minutes. "You want the real prize?" "Go check the Old Quarry boundary," I shouted, pointing wildly in the opposite direction from where Voss had fled. "That's where the high-grade monazite sand is concentrated. That's the collateral. Thorne wants that first." Kellen hesitated for a fraction of a second, the resource motive momentarily overriding the anomaly suspicion. Monazite was a sure thing. The anomaly was a risk. He barked an order to the third man. "You two stay here. If he moves, you contain him." "You!" He pointed at the third man. "Go check the boundary. If you find a sample container, call me." As the third man moved away, I knew I had bought Dr. Voss perhaps 60 seconds. It wasn't enough. I needed a bigger move. My gaze fell on the borehole, the one leading straight down to the immense spherical structure we had found. This was a long shot, a desperate throw of the dice, but it was the only move left. I had to force Kellen to retreat. "You need to step back, Kellen," I said, my voice dropping to a serious, almost urgent whisper. "You think Thorne wants the deposit? He does, but you don't understand why he's been so focused on this specific region for 3 years. The reason the original miners shut down isn't just because of geologically unstable gases. The unusual atmospheric conditions they recorded in 1890? That wasn't just gas. That was a pressure release from the sphere below. That structure is unstable, and drilling into it, even a small borehole, has destabilized the internal equilibrium. I was completely improvising, using the old documents and the new data to weave a terrifying, plausible lie. I grabbed a fistful of dirt from the side of the borehole and threw it away from me. I was only able to keep it stable for the sample retrieval. If you use your sensors again, you'll see the pressure is rising. You drill 1 more millimeter, you move that hole, or you tamper with the seal, and you trigger a massive, localized subterranean vapor explosion. Thorne won't get his anomaly. He'll get a crater. Kellen, a man who dealt in kinetic risk, paused. The gravity anomaly was worth the risk, but an immediate localized explosion that might bury him and his team? That was different. He looked at the drill site, then back at me. I could see the internal calculation happening behind his cold eyes. He was deciding if I was a terrified dreamer or a man holding the detonator to a catastrophic event. He didn't take another step forward. Instead, he reached for his radio. "Hold position," he ordered the man who had gone to the boundary. "We have a potential containment breach. Hayes is staying put. Thorne needs to know the subterranean structure is compromised. We are aborting immediate retrieval. We are only securing the perimeter." The bluff had worked. I had stalled them. But now, I was a prisoner on my own land, and the biggest twist was yet to come. I still had the core sample, but I knew that the minute Thorne got the updated seismic readings, he would know I was lying about the vapor, and he would come back with military precision. The land was secured, but the chase for the ultimate secret had only just begun. Kellen's decision to secure the perimeter instead of pressing the attack bought me the critical hours I needed. He had traded a swift, violent resolution for a calculated corporate siege, based on the assumption that the subterranean sphere was a ticking time bomb I couldn't defuse. But the truth was, I had no idea if my vapor explosion theory was real. I just needed them to believe it long enough for me to enact the final, desperate maneuver. I watched through the night as Kellen and his 2 men established overlapping security positions along the Old Quarry Road, effectively blockading my property. They were waiting for new orders from Thorne, likely involving specialized drilling equipment and remote operation, anything to bypass the supposed vapor instability. But I wasn't waiting for them. Before dawn, Dr. Voss reappeared, having circled back through the creek bed. She was exhausted, but triumphant. "The sample is secure," she whispered, handing me the lead-lined cooler bag. "I deposited it 50 miles north in a secured locker. We have to go public, Andrew. Whatever is in that sphere, it's not meant for one man, even Thorne, to control. The analysis I ran on the core sample confirms it. It's not just highly enriched uraninite. It's mixed with trace amounts of an element we can't identify. It registers atomic weight, but the decay signature is completely foreign. It's an element not listed on the periodic table." This was the final staggering revelation. My worthless land contained not just resources, but a physical, law-defying material. The gravity anomaly, the unknown element, the perfect spherical structure, it all pointed toward a discovery that would reshape not just the energy market, but the understanding of physics itself. I realized the scale of my initial greed was laughable. I hadn't acquired a profitable asset. I had acquired a secret that could get me killed. "We don't go public with the sample," I corrected her, tapping the now-signed loan agreement that gave me permanent access to the Old Quarry Road. "We go public with the bank. That's the only way to stop Thorne without being immediately killed or silenced." My plan was insane, a total reversal of the power dynamic, but it was the only move left. I pulled out my laptop, which contained the finalized Monazite survey, the bank's signed term sheet, and all the historical documents related to the Monazite tailings. Crucially, I also had the initial, low-grade scans of the gravity anomaly, stripped of the most alarming data, but clearly indicating an unusual deep structure. At 8:00 a.m., precisely when First Regional Bank opened, I didn't call the police or the FBI. I called the biggest financial news outlet in the country, a channel specializing in resource commodities and hostile takeovers. I asked to speak to their top investigative reporter, I told him I had a story about corporate malfeasance, a $1.5 million loan, and the deliberate suppression of a multi-billion-dollar rare earth deposit by First Regional Bank, all tied up with the involvement of Elias Thorne. The reporter, smelling blood, was on the line instantly. I fed him the narrative, how the bank had maliciously undervalued my land, calling it worthless, only to reverse course in 10 minutes after learning I had secured a pre-existing agreement with Thorne. I showed him the signed contract granting me permanent access to the Old Quarry Road, thereby proving the bank acknowledged the strategic value of the surrounding land they already owned. The bank president himself, Robert Harrington, personally orchestrated the cover-up, I stated dramatically. They were trying to seize control of the monazite-rich tailings along the Old Quarry Road by keeping the valuation low. I have the signed agreement, the geological reports, and the recorded call log. I concluded the call by telling the reporter that while I had been forced to grant Thorne first refusal on the monazite, I was preparing to hand over all data concerning the unusual deep structure beneath the property to a neutral university research team, just to make sure the bank couldn't keep suppressing the full extent of the discovery. Within the hour, the story broke, not as an exclusive about a potential new element, but as a scathing report about financial fraud and corporate greed. The headline screamed, "Bank executes hostile land grab after calling 10 billion rare earth deposit worthless." The result was instantaneous. The bank's stock plummeted, Harrington was suspended, and the FBI launched an immediate investigation, not into me, but into the bank's highly irregular and suspicious loan reversal. First Regional Bank was now too busy trying to save itself from a federal investigation and shareholder lawsuits to worry about a remote piece of scrubland. The official legal battle was now focused on the monazite and the Old Quarry Road. The distraction. This was my escape. I had turned the attention onto the money and the bank's actions, using the highly valuable but secondary monazite deposit as the bait. Kellen's team, suddenly surrounded by flashing news vans and federal agents investigating a financial crime, were forced to retreat, their mission compromised. The gravity anomaly, the unknown element, the true secret, was momentarily forgotten, swallowed by the scandal I had engineered. I watched the news report on my phone as I drove out of the county, leaving the land, my land, behind, temporarily secured by a ring of federal bureaucracy. I had successfully leveraged one tiny piece of information, one powerful phone call, and one absurdly ambitious lie to turn a bank's laugh into a multi-billion-dollar crisis. I had the core sample, the most valuable object on the planet, tucked securely away, and I had exposed Thorne's ruthless tactics without revealing the true apocalyptic scale of my discovery. The land was still mine, but the game had moved into a whole new, terrifying phase. The worthless dirt had made me a target, but it had also made me the only person holding the key to a secret that could change the world. And no one, not the bank, not Thorne, and not even the government, knew where I was going next.